Welcome to Modern Steel Construction's monthly Field Notes podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Weisenberger. This month, we're talking with Hollie Noveletsky, CEO of Novel Ironworks, an AISC member fabricator in Greenland, New Hampshire, also an AISC board member and a judge for our most recent Ideas Awards. Thank you for that, by the way. And Hollie is also a geropsych nurse practitioner. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Perfect.
Excellent. Geropsych. We'll go into that in a little bit. Welcome, Hollie. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. So, we have a lot to talk about, not just fabrication, but let's start with the nursing side of things. Can you tell me a little bit about your history in the profession and how you got into it?
I started out in college actually going for engineering back in the 70s. And it was a time where you could do a 2-2 or 2-3 program. So you do your first 2 years undergrad, getting your prerequisites out of the way, and then you transfer over. And at that time, I was the only woman in the program, and it was just, there was not any camaraderie. It was a very difficult time. Everything was scaled. I can remember being so happy. I got a 9 out of 10 on my quiz, and I failed because it was scaled.
Wow.
And I went home one time, and I had to get my wisdom teeth out, and I had a student nurse, and I thought, oh, I can do that. So I transferred into the nursing program, and it became my passion.
What school? Where did you study?
I transferred over to Rush University in Chicago, and I got my bachelor's at Rush. And then from there, I went to Boston University, and I got a master's in geriatric nursing and became a geriatric nurse practitioner. And after that, I liked school, if you can't tell. After that, I went to BC, and I got my doctorate in nursing research. And then after that, I went to MGH Institute for Health Professions, and I got a post master's certificate in psychiatric nursing and combined the geriatric and the psych and became a geropsych nurse. And I specialize in home care for people with dementia.
Well, that's great. And so, it sounds like most of your, education was back east. I'm just curious, how did you get to Chicago? How did you find your way here?
It was on my way home from Lawrence University, which was in Appleton, Wisconsin. So I was moving back east.
Gotcha. Slowly making your way, right.
But Lawrence had a 2-2 program where you do the 2 years at Lawrence and then the last 2 at Rush. So that's how I got to Rush.
Now you're the CEO of a steel fabrication business. How on earth did that happen?
Well, my dad started the company back in 1956, and all the kids, my sister, myself, my cousins, we all worked in the business growing up. We were either the blueprint girl, the blueprint boy, the errand girl. And then while I was in nursing school, I worked in estimating and the computer room, data inputting. So I've always been in the company on some level. And then the last couple of years that my dad was alive, I would have coffee with him every day, and we would talk about business and his philosophy on business and how it's evolved and how the steel industry has evolved. So I always knew I'd be here, and I was always here on some level, but it became completely full-time after his death in '99.
You sounded like you'd always eventually be back at the shop. I have to ask, early on when you decided to go into healthcare, I'm assuming he was supportive of that, but did he also seem to want you? Did he know that you'd be coming back into the fabrication business, or did he think, no, I lost a daughter to another field, so to speak?
My dad was the best. He was my biggest supporter, and he always said I could be anything I ever wanted to be. And even as a little kid, I can remember getting into a fight with someone. I was like 6 years old because they said, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I said, I'm going to be a bunny rabbit. And they said, you can't be a bunny rabbit. I said, my father said I can be anything I want when I grow up, and that's what I want to be. So when I went into nursing, he was very supportive of it. I was the first in my family to graduate college. So anything that had to do with education, he was very supportive of. He also knew that when he passed, because he had been working on his transition for 10 years before he died, because he had heart disease. So he'd been working on it for 10 years. And he would say at that time, all you really need to know is read a financial and how to fire somebody. And don't mess it up. That was his part. Don't mess it up.
I was going to say, one of my questions was, what's the most, best or most memorable piece of advice from your father? Don't mess it up. Was that it?
That was one of them. We call them Ralphisms, and he had a bunch of them that that just would always stick with you.
Okay.
Yeah, but
That's
that was
excellent.
his parting advice to me. He also said to me, which sticks a lot lately, is that if everybody likes you, you're doing something wrong.
Uh-huh.
And this is because in times throughout your life, you have to draw a line. You have to make a stand for what you think is right or wrong.
Mhm.
And if you draw a line, then somebody's going to be on the other side. So that was one of the ones that's always stuck with me.
Well, so you obviously you learned from your father, and from what I understand, your son is taking over the business at some point. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so,
He's been in for at least 10 years now.
okay, okay. What's interesting to me is you've got this advice is passing down through the generations. Are you finding are there Hollyisms? Since you had the Ralphisms, or are you going a lot with passing along a lot of the same advice from your father, or tweaking it, so to speak?
I think the one that I try and pass on the most to him is that, because it was the hard transition for me was my father was an extrovert and I'm an introvert.
Okay.
And people would come to me all the time and say, "Oh, your father would be doing it this way." And it took a little while
Right.
to realize that, I wasn't failing. I just wasn't him. And they needed me to be him. But if I was him, I wouldn't be true to myself.
Of course.
So I tell my son, you have to make it your own.
Sure.
Make the business your own. Put your own mark on it. Bring to it what you have as your strengths, because they're not the same as mine, and mine weren't the same as my father's. So make it your own. Make
Okay.
a mark. Yeah.
On that note, was your son, was he excited to get into the business from the very beginning? Was he like you, where he knew he would eventually be working in the family business, or did he have other interests early on?
We didn't think he'd be in the business. He, from a very young age, was into the bicycles, and he worked for a local bike company, Bicycle Bob, who took him under his wing, and really, I think Bob had planned that he would buy him out, and that would be his retirement, would be Josh taking over. And we all thought that was going to be the route. And when Josh finished college, he bought a van, he pimped it out. He was going to go around the country, down Central America rather, surfing. And he got to California and he was downhill mountain biking and he shattered his arm.
Oh.
And he had to come home for surgery and rehab. And when he came back, he spent some time in the shop and he loved it. He loved the guys in the shop. He loved the work, and he never left.
With Novel Ironworks, how many? Can you tell me a little bit about the size of the business? I mean, it's a family business, but when people hear that, they always think small. But how many employees do you have?
So, Novel's going on third generation with my son, and we have approximately 100 employees. It fluctuates some, especially now with COVID, but we're about 100 employees. We also have Rose Steel, which is our erection company, and miscellaneous iron, and that's another 40 odd employees.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. So can you talk about some of the, is there one main challenge or a few challenges with running a family business?
A family. Family. It's a huge responsibility having a family business, not speaking business wise, but in the family. I mean, family members really take pride in it. And I know my aunt, it's everything for her. And she asks every day. She's 90 years old, but this is the family that she grew up in. And so it's a lot of pressure that way. I have a sister. I had to buy her out when my dad died. Okay. Luckily, my son is an only, so he won't have that same pressure. But because it's family, and many of our employees have worked for 3 generations in my family now, so they're family to us. So it's sometimes hard to draw that line because I know their families. I know 3 generations of their families. We have employees here who worked 3 generations, many 2 generations. So when they have issues at home or in their families, it's hard to draw that line because they're family to you too.
Sure. It sounds like one of the, blessings and not curses, but just one of the interesting elements of a family business is that the family is much larger than you ever thought it was going to be.
Yes, it is. And it keeps extending out. And my father used to say another Ralphism, you no longer need a business degree, you need a psych degree because it's all about managing the personalities.
Well, that's good. That falls perfectly into your training. And I was going to say, ask on that note. So, was there anything, I mean, that you could apply from the nursing profession? Like you did that for years, and then you came into the manufacturing world. Was there anything from nursing that kind of helped prepare you, or that you apply on a somewhat regular basis in your role there at Novel Ironworks?
There are two ways. Well, first, it gives me balance because if we don't get the job, at least I know nobody died. I mean, it's not life threatening. I think it helped a lot with getting through 2008 and even the COVID experience, especially the COVID experience, because I took over the nursing piece of it for the company. I monitored all the COVID compliance issues. I monitored what was going on in our community. I monitored everyone who had a symptom. I physically laid eyes on them and followed them up at home and put the guidelines on them. But when my dad died and I came in full time, I knew I didn't have the technical information, the technical background that many people in our industry had, but I needed to make a mark. So
Sure.
I looked at nursing, and I know that nursing is a profession of advocacy. We advocate for patients.
Sure.
So I thought, well, I mean, I can apply that to steel and I could advocate. So that became my focus, is the political aspect. And at that time, it is, again, the foreign trade was a big issue for me.
Sure. Speaking of advocacy, I'm going to ask you to advocate for your company a little bit. What maybe is the most particularly interesting project that you've had, or one that you're the most proud of? I'm sure you're proud of all the projects that have come through there, but in your time with the company, but is there one or two maybe that stick out in your head that you're like, wow, I love this one, or wow, that was fun, I never want to do it again, something that just kind of sticks out?
But we have a project now with Moriarty in Boston it's a side plate job,
Okay.
which is really, really challenging for us. It's just so much welding. 27 miles of welding for a small shop like ours.
Wow.
So I'm real proud of the guys. They do a great job. We have wonderful people in the shop that they really take pride in their work, and it's amazing. This is our second side plate job, and the first one fit up beautifully. That was several years back, I think. But as far as jobs that stick out in my head, mostly it's growing up with my dad, and everywhere we went throughout New England, he'd say, I did that building. I did that building.
Sure.
I remember when I did that one. And it was like he was so proud to be able to say he put a lasting impression on our community, and he was so proud of that.
Well, that's another parallel between the two professions. I feel like you can, you have a tangible product that you can say you did, and it's the same with patients. You can say, I helped that person. I advocated for them. Yeah.
Right.
On that note, so I understand you still keep a small nursing practice. Is that correct?
Correct. I haven't seen patients, well, now with COVID, but so probably since late winter, early winter. But I do keep a very small private practice of people at home who are homebound with dementia and they can't get out and they have psychiatric issues or mental health issues. I'll go and see them at home.
Okay. Oh, that's great. I was going to say, how do you juggle that with, working with your role at Novel and everything else? Do you sleep?
I do sleep, and so I'm not seeing them every day,
Sure.
and I can schedule it around my schedule.
Okay.
Because they're home.
Gotcha. Well, very good. You've talked a little bit about the current pandemic, and of course, it's hard not to. So, and it sounds like you've done some work there at the shop, just kind of keeping an eye on your employees. Has the pandemic affected Novel's business?
It hasn't affected our bidding business, but it has affected our production, because as our knowledge of COVID evolved and the list of symptoms increased, I would monitor anyone who called in sick. And anyone who called in sick, I would call them up and ask them what their symptoms were, or I would walk the shop and see if anyone had symptoms. And if they had even a slight symptom, I would put them out for the 2-week quarantine period. Now it's down to the 10 days, 3 days resolving, but because I didn't want to take the chance of somebody bringing it in. If somebody brought it in and we had an outbreak, then we would be shut down. But luckily, and we have a fabulous governor, Governor Sununu, when they were talking about shutting the state, I texted him and I said, please keep us open. There are 3 fabricators in our state, and between us, you'll keep over 300 people off unemployment. And he texted me right back and he goes, absolutely, I'll double check. And we were allowed to stay open, thank God, because not only the business wise, but mental health wise.
Sure.
And people were saying, because I kept such a tight eye on everybody, symptom wise, somebody said to me, I feel safer here than I do at home.
That's a great thing to hear. I mean, maybe not for home, but I mean, that's a testament to, some good work there. So on that note, have you been doing any COVID related work outside of the shop?
Yes, I have volunteered. The state has a program, New Hampshire COVID Alliance Senior Support Team. So most of the COVID, as you know, is having the worst effect in our long-term care facilities.
Sure.
So this is a program. It's not necessarily through DHHS, but they coordinate with DHHS, and we monitor every day all the facilities to monitor for outbreaks and for supplies for PPE, because PPE became extremely difficult to get, and it's still very expensive and being price gouged. And then we monitor to make sure that if they do have an outbreak, that they're getting the proper guidance on that. So I'm doing that. And then the governor set up the GOFER, which is the Governor's Office for Economic Recovery and Relief, that $1.25 billion that came into the state for COVID relief. And he asked me to be on the Stakeholders Advisory Board. So I have been participating in that.
Okay. Well, excellent. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your experience on the Stakeholders Advisory Group? Is that something that kind of meets on a regular basis?
We just finished up meeting probably about a week or two ago. It was meeting twice a week, 2 to 3 hour conference call, because of the COVID, you can't meet in person. So the state got $1.25 billion for federal money for the state for economic relief due to COVID. Okay. And the governor set up this board. It's the GOFER, the Governor's Office of Economic Relief and Recovery. Right. And then there were 2 subgroups. There was the legislative group, and then there were the stakeholders. So people from the community that sat on the board. And then we listened to people from the community, different sectors of industry, to get their impact, their financial impact from COVID and being closed. Right. And then we made recommendations to the governor on how that money should be spent and which different sectors it should go to and how it should be distributed, which channels.
Okay. Well, Hollie, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.